The land did not welcome him. Elias Boone knew at the moment his boots sank into the dust of the farm he had bartered his life away for. The air was too still, the sky too wide, and every fence-post leaned like a weary old man with no hope left. He stood at the edge of his property, saddle creaking as he shifted, and let his eyes trace the crooked barn that loomed against the horizon. It was the kind of place folks in town whispered about, a place passed from one desperate hand to another until it landed in his. He had sold what little remained of his fortune, his cattle, his wagon, even his wife's keepsake ring, to claim it. And for what? For silence, for ruin, for a new beginning that already smelled of endings. The horse beneath him stamped, uneasy. Elias adjusted his hat, the brim shadowing eyes made older than his 38 years by grief and hunger. The journey here had left him hollow, yet he felt the weight of eyes even in this emptiness. The prairie always watched. He slid from the saddle, boots crunching in brittle weeds, and forced himself toward the barn. Each step echoed. The doors sagged but held shut as though keeping something trapped inside. His hand lingered on the latch. For a moment, he thought of his wife, Mary, her laughter like bells before the coughing took her, before the fever swept her and the babe into the ground. That memory was carved into him, a scar deeper than hunger. He had sworn he would not be a man who begged fate for pity. Yet here he was, gambling his last breath on a farm no one wanted. He pulled the door. It groaned open, heavy with dust and secrets. Sunlight fell in thin stripes through cracks in the roof, slicing the gloom. His nose filled with the smell of old hay, rot, and something else, something metallic, sharp, like iron left too long in the rain. He froze. There, swaying gently from a rope tied to the rafters, hung a girl. Not a child, not a woman fully, but something in between, her body stretched long as if the earth had made her wrong. She was enormous, her limbs thick and powerful even in stillness. Her bare feet brushed the barn wall. Her head lolled, hair like a black river spilling forward. For a moment Elias thought she was gone, and his heart seized. Then he saw it, faint, nearly imperceptible, the flutter of her chest. A breath. The knife was in his hand before he knew it. He cut her down, the rope burning his palm, her weight crashing into him like a felled tree. She collapsed onto the straw, body heaving once, twice, then lying still. Elias knelt, trembling, pressing his ear to her chest. A heartbeat pounded slow but steady, louder than the silence that roared around him. "Lord help me," he whispered. He fetched water from the trough, cupping it to her lips. At first it dribbled down her chin, then her throat worked and she drank, eyes flickering beneath their lids. He watched her as though she were a creature conjured from nightmare and prayer both, unsure which. Her eyes opened. Gray, storm gray, and filled with shame before they even focused on him. She tried to sit, but the effort shook her body. He caught her shoulders, steadying her, and felt the immense strength buried in those muscles even as they trembled like a newborn colt's legs. "You shouldn't have," she rasped, voice cracked and low. "You should have let me hang." Elias stared at her, words stuck in his throat. She was young, 20, perhaps 21, and yet the heaviness in her voice was older than his own. "I ain't the sort to let a soul hang in my barn," he said finally. Her gaze flickered around the space, then back to him. She looked away, ashamed, as if his eyes burned. He saw the rope burns wring her neck, the scars on her hands. Not scars of work, but of struggle, as if she had lived her whole life in chains no one else could see. "I'll leave," she muttered. "Soon as I can walk." "You'll do no such thing," Elias answered. He surprised himself with the steel in his voice. "You'll stay. Least until you can stand proper." Her jaw set, but she had no strength to argue. She turned her face to the wall, as though his kindness hurt worse than cruelty. He built a fire in the corner stove, the flames clawing upward to warm the chill that clung to her. He laid out bread, hard but edible, and placed it within reach. She did not touch it. He draped his wife's quilt, Mary's quilt, stitched with patient hands on nights when the wind howled outside, over the girl. The fabric looked small on her massive frame, yet she clutched it, eyes closing as though some warmth still lingered in its threads. Elias sat on an upturned bucket, watching her breathe. The barn creaked with nightfall, and his mind filled with questions. Who was she? Why here? Why this rope, this despair? He wanted to ask, but her face warned him silence was the only mercy he could give. So he sat in silence, a widower with empty pockets, and a girl who carried death's shadow on her shoulders. Sleep would not come. Every creak of the barn, every gust of wind against the boards, felt like a threat. And deeper still was the thought that this girl's presence was no accident. The West had a way of delivering burdens disguised as blessings. Or perhaps blessings disguised as burdens. By morning, she stirred. He found her sitting against the wall, bread in her lap, untouched. Her eyes caught his and slid away. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said softly, "Clara." It hung in the air like a confession. "Elias Boone," he replied. "This farm's mine. Or what's left of it. You should have let me die, Mr. Boone." The words cut. He studied her, the way her huge hands clenched the bread but never lifted it, the way her shoulders curled inward as if to hide her size. He saw not a monster, as the town would surely call her, but a girl crushed by shame. Outside, a crow cawed, harsh and final. Clara flinched at the sound. Elias reached into his satchel, pulled a tin cup, filled it with water, and set it by her knee. Then he returned to his bucket, saying nothing. He would not press her. Whatever had driven her to the rope was a wound too raw to touch. But he could not stop the image, the rope, the swaying body, the storm-gray eyes meeting his with shame and defiance tangled together. He knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that his life had turned upon that moment. All day, he worked the farm. The fences leaned, the well creaked, the earth refused the plow. His back ached, his hands bled, and still the land resisted him. When he returned to the barn, she was there, standing now, taller than any man he had known. She looked unsteady, but she stood. "You should go," she said again. "People won't forgive you, taking me in." "People never forgave me much to begin with," Elias answered. A flicker crossed her face, something close to surprise, almost relief. But it vanished as quickly as it came. That night, the wind rose, rattling the roof. Elias sat by the fire, staring into flames, when he heard it, hooves. Faint, distant, but certain. He stiffened. The sound grew, then hushed, as if whoever rode had stopped just beyond the barn. Clara's eyes met his, wide and fearful. He rose, hand on the shotgun resting by the door, though he prayed he would not need it. The night pressed close, thick with silence after the hooves had stilled. Somewhere out there, someone waited. Watching. And Elias Boone knew with a hollow certainty that whatever had driven Clara Vale to the rope was not finished with her. The hooves faded into silence, but Elias Boone did not lower the shotgun. He stood at the barn door, listening, every nerve drawn taut as a bowstring. The night pressed in, thick with the kind of quiet that makes a man feel hunted. Clara Vale sat rigid by the fire, her gray eyes fixed on him, waiting for his choice. At last, when no rider revealed himself, Elias set the shotgun across his knees and returned to the flame. Yet he knew it was no trick of the wind. Someone had come. Someone had seen. In the morning, the evidence lay clear, hoof prints in the dust, circling the barn like a predator's path. Elias bent to study them, jaw tight. They were fresh, pressed deep by a heavy rider. Clara stood in the doorway, quilt wrapped around her broad shoulders. She didn't speak, but he saw her knuckles whiten against the fabric. "They know you're here," he said quietly. She swallowed hard, but her chin lifted with stubborn pride. "Then you best send me off before they come back." Elias turned his gaze on her, steady and grim. I ain't sending you anywhere. Not when I found you half dead under my roof. A shadow flickered across her face. Gratitude, maybe. Or fear. He couldn't tell which. She returned inside without another word. The hours dragged. Elias worked the fields with sweat pouring down his back, his mind never leaving the girl in the barn. Clara moved slow that day, strength returning in stubborn increments. She carried buckets, mended a fence post with a swing of her arm that startled even him, then retreated into herself as though ashamed of being seen. Every act of labor seemed a confession, proof she could be useful, proof she did not wish to be a burden. He watched from a distance, pretending not to notice. By sundown, the first whispers reached him. At the well in town, two women drew their buckets and spoke low, not low enough. They say Boone took in a giantess. A monster girl. I heard she was strung up once. Folk don't string a body unless there's cause. Elias drank the gossip like bitter tonic, keeping his face a mask. He finished his business and rode back before dark, but the poison had already spread. When he returned to the farm, Clara stood by the corral, her shadow long against the dirt. She didn't look at him when she asked, "What did they say?" "That you're here," he admitted. Her mouth tightened. "Then it won't be long." She turned away, but he caught the tremor in her shoulders. She feared not for herself but for what her presence would cost him. Elias felt something tighten in his chest, a recognition. He too had lived with that shame, the weight of others' pity, the silence of being judged by what could not be changed. That night, as the wind rattled the barn roof, she joined him by the stove. Neither spoke. But when he pushed the bread toward her, she finally tore off a piece and ate. Small gestures, silent bargains, these were the only language they shared. Days bled into one another. The farm resisted Elias, but with Clara's strength the fences stood straighter, the well ran cleaner, the barn took shape as though it had found reason to endure. They did not laugh, they did not smile, but they endured together. It was a rhythm that felt almost like hope. Then the riders came. 3 of them, dust rising behind as they pulled up to the farmyard. Elias saw them from the porch, men from town, faces he knew but never trusted. They dismounted slow, like men savoring cruelty. One spat in the dirt. "Heard tell you're harborin' somethin' big in that barn," the leader drawled. "Figure we'd come see for ourselves." Elias stepped down, shoulders square, hands empty though the shotgun leaned against the doorframe. "Ain't nothing here but what belongs to me." The man's grin was yellowed, wolfish. "That so? Folks talk, Boone. They say you found yourself a freak. Rope didn't finish her, so you keep her for yourself." Laughter rippled among them. Elias felt his throat tighten, but he kept his voice low. "You best ride on. There's no welcome for you here." The leader's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer until the sour stink of whiskey washed over Elias. "Maybe we don't need welcome. Maybe we do the town a kindness and finish what someone else started." Behind him, Clara emerged. She filled the doorway, quilt slipping from her shoulders to reveal arms like oak limbs, face pale but unflinching. The men froze for half a heartbeat, then one let out a bark of laughter. "God Almighty," he sneered. "She's bigger'n a draft horse." Something in Elias snapped then. Not rage, but resolve, quiet and sharp as a blade. He stepped in front of her, planting himself between the men and the girl. "You'll not touch her," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of all his losses, all his grief, hardened into iron. "Not while I draw breath." The leader laughed, but it was thinner now. He shoved Elias back, hard enough to stagger him. "Step aside. Don't make this ugly." Clara moved then. She did not lunge, did not strike. She walked forward, slow and steady, until she stood beside Elias. Then, with one motion, she bent and lifted the broken farm gate lying in the dirt, hefting it like a shield. Her eyes locked on the men, storm-gray, unyielding. "You want me?" she said, her voice low but carrying. "Then come and try." The men faltered. The weight of her size, her calm defiance, pressed heavier than any weapon. The leader spat again, but his eyes flickered with doubt. "Ain't worth the trouble," he muttered. He turned, mounted, and rode off. The others followed, though their laughter trailed behind, brittle as glass. Silence swallowed the yard. Clara lowered the gate, breath unsteady, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Elias reached to steady her, his hand resting briefly against hers. She looked down at him, eyes softening in a way that startled them both. "You didn't have to stand in front of me," she whispered. "And you didn't have to lift that gate," he answered. They held each other's gaze. No vows, no promises, just the raw truth of two souls who had chosen, in that moment, not to surrender. That night, they sat by the fire again. Elias poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. She took it, their fingers brushing. The world outside might still call her a monster, might still call him a fool, but here in the circle of firelight they were something else. Something unspoken, but real. When the wind rose, Elias thought again of the hoof prints circling his barn, the whispers in town, the men who had laughed and retreated only for now. He knew the battle was not finished. The West did not grant peace so easily. But he also knew this, he was no longer alone. Clara sipped her coffee, eyes closed, as though tasting life for the first time. Elias watched her, and in the quiet he felt it, the faintest stirring of hope, like green shoots breaking through hard soil. The narrator's voice, if one were to put it to words, would say this: sometimes the frontier gave a man ruin when he asked for fortune. Sometimes it gave him a burden so heavy it nearly broke him. But now and then, it gave him a reason to endure, a soul whose strength made his own weakness holy. The fire crackled. Beyond the walls, night stretched wide and uncertain. Somewhere in that darkness, men whispered and plotted. But here, in this fragile circle of light, a farm once cursed had become a place of mercy. And mercy, Elias thought as he set his cup down and met Clara's eyes across the flame, was the rarest treasure a man could ever find in the West.